following program contains explicit material. If you are under 18 years old, please fuck off.
Welcome to Spinnin Yarns. I'm your host, Joe Amero, and I, for one, could have been dead many times over a long time ago. But for some reason, I'm still here. I've had a crazy life and met a ton of amazing people along the way who've inspired me. I'm going to invite some of these folks here to share some of their incredible and unbelievable stories with us. Who knows, we may even learn something along the way. There's way too much bullshit in this life. We need more real talk from real people. So sit back, chill out, and listen up, because we're spinning yarns.
Hey, welcome back to Spinnin Yarns. I'm your host, Joe Amero. And right off the top of the show here, I'd like to make an apology and a retraction. On this show, I've said a lot of derogatory and unfair remarks about a group of people, and I want to apologize. It's not fair. It's not right, and it's not me. So, to all the people of England, I'd like to say sorry. I have no problem with you. I don't know where that started and became an inside joke. It's not funny. I love your music. I love your actors. I love everything about you. And that being said, of course, I hate the monarchy and fuck the king, and this flag has been hung upside down in protest. As far as last week's show, Truth to Power, I'd like to thank the employees of the corporation for taking time out of their busy work schedules to view the show and comment and erase. The comments stay forever on the YouTube channel, so we have all your comments, and they were creative, but I have to say thank you very much for our highest rated show. As of this recording, we are sitting at 666 views, so thank you for that, and march on, Christian soldiers, march on. It's funny that your biggest takeaway from that entire episode, in which I sat at a desk and poured my heart out with an hourglass filled with my dead brother's remains in front of me, about the injustices and illegal activity and neglect and cruel and ignorant behavior I've been the victim of in the past few years. Your biggest takeaway was that I mentioned that some of you don't give away juice. March on, Christian soldiers. You're doing God's work. And remember, we see you. And you don't have to believe in harm reduction, because it believes in you. I feel so much better lifted. The gaslighting and threats and bullshit is over. Fuck off. And on today's show, we're going to get down to some real business in the world that actually makes a difference. We're going to talk to someone who actually really cares about people and would give them the juice out of their own fridge, I'm sure. We're going to talk to Eris Nyx from the Drug User Liberation Front. And Eris Nyx most definitely has the juice. Here's a little call to action from the Dulf's website on the Dope on Arrival program. We call on every leader in British Columbia and Canada to listen to people who use drugs and live up to their responsibility to stop the drug war's senseless cycle of death. Our demands are the following. All levels of government must immediately fund programs for safe and accessible supplies of all drugs, including cocaine, heroin, and crystal meth, by directly listening to user groups and people who use drugs. Number 2, all levels of government must immediately develop an accessible legal framework that decriminalizes, licenses, funds, and provides facility spaces for heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine consumption clubs. Number 3, All government commissions on drug policy, safe supply, and decriminalization must include meaningful representation from drug user groups. Nothing about us without us. It is with profound frustration and unimaginable grief we share this message to provincial and federal government officials. Step up and address the issues that are killing us, or allow us access to the resources and funds to do it ourselves, outside of the constraints of this discriminatory structure. From the Drug User Liberation Front, this is Eris Nyx. Boom. We're being recorded.
Cool.
Eris, welcome. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah. Sorry I'm late. I've had an insane day.
You're 2 minutes late. You can afford to be 2 minutes insane. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too. How are you? How are you doing?
I'm also on the brink of insanity, but
yeah,
I'm alive. What's going on? What's new and exciting?
Oh, just my stalker tried to steal my identity, so I've spent all day trying to deal with that.
Like banking and all this, like getting in, or like who?
No, mostly trying to dox my address, I figure, through BC societies online.
What?
So I had to spend all day on hold trying to get them to revoke access or whatever. Anyway, it's all over now, but that's why I'm late, because I was dealing with that, which is super annoying. But it's done with, hopefully, for the next little bit until the next thing, you know?
Yeah, I hope so. That's fucked up. Yeah, I just have you on here. I don't have any great gifts or surprises or anything. I just, for my money, you and your crew out there on the West Coast are doing the best and most important thing in the fucking world, and I just want to run it back and, just boost the signal. I just want to talk about all the stuff, Drug User Liberation Front, you know it. What's just give us the elevator pitch for the uninitiated.
I mean, I don't think there's there's no easy way. The situation's so fucked and psychotic. Like, really, I should start with the coroner's data is where I should start. So, one sec. BCCDC. Is this just a video or is this just audio, or you do video?
I do both. I get more hits on the YouTube.
So, if you want to give me access to share my screen.
Oh shit. Yeah.
I'll show you something that I think is particularly interesting. So if you go, this is the, can you see this?
Yep.
This is a BC CDC's website. So there's also a version of this unregulated drug poisoning emergency dashboard on the corner. BC Corner also has one. So there's two dashboards that didn't hyperlink to where I thought it would anyway. That's besides the point. So you look at this nice little chart they got here. This is Vancouver Coastal Health, where I live. This is unregulated drug deaths per 100,000 population in 2023. They actually have this set to exclude Vancouver Center North. And if you see down here, it says Vancouver Center North is the name of the local health authority that includes the downtown east side, right? So we go here, we click include. Well,
fuck.
This is us.
Holy fuck.
556.8 deaths per 100,000 population. So six. Here's the crux of the issue to me. In my neighborhood where I live, where I open my door and there are people overdosed on the street, 6 in every 1,000 people will die of an overdose this year. 6 in it. You take 1,000 people, 6 of those people will die of overdose. And year after, you can look at this chart, like we blow every other health authority out of the water. I'm just curious. So the baseline, if we look at Canada rate of OD, let's say 2013. I guess I should write overdose, not OD. Should have came with my material prepared, haha. But can I get a number per 100,000? Per 100,000. God, they make it hard to find this information, huh?
Yeah.
Death.
How it's just excluded. That's the default when you open it.
Well, not just that, but I can't find the Canadian baseline, like a baseline rate for Canada to draw a comparison to. Canada OD rate per 100,000 population, because this all comes into, okay, here we go. So, and this is already 2022, so this things have already gotten bad across the country. But for comparison, the Canadian 2022, and I can also I'll switch this from 2023 to 2022. The Canadian rate of OD per 100,000 people, right, is 19 per 100,000. I want to say before what we call the drug toxicity crisis, or the, whatever people call it, opioid crisis, whatever. There's a bunch of different names for it, but I call it the crisis of market regulation. Before all of this started, I think the rate was closer to like 7 per 100,000. In 2022, in the downtown east side, our rate was 481 per 100,000, which, if the Canadian national rate in 2022 is 19 per 100,000, 481 divided by 19. So the downtown east side has a rate 25 times higher than the national average, which is, it's ludicrous. Like basically, I know someone that dies every week, right? So the background of this problem is, in my specific community, I don't want to talk in some kind of sweeping generalization about every community across the country or world, because I don't think this problem exists as acutely. But in the downtown east side, where the rate of death is 25 times higher than the national rate of death, there's no intervention. There's no intervention slowing down this, anomaly in public health statistics. And it's a, while I call it an anomaly, it's really a tragedy. So basically, the background of this is that people are getting wiped out in my community, wiped out by drug overdose deaths. And in 2018, so I used for even further context, probably in 2014, I worked for Rain City Housing and the shelter system, 2014 through 2018. And what you see happen year after year is an escalating number of overdoses, where we would be responding with naloxone, giving breaths, not chest compressions for the most part. You don't really do that unless someone's heart stopped beating, but real fucked up shit till it got to the point where we were responding to 10 overdoses per day, right? Per shift. Mm-hmm. Which is fucked. And especially, I was like 23, 24. Really fucked me up. So I moved into overdose prevention service delivery. So what is now called housing overdose prevention services. So opening up safer use rooms in housing sites and shelters. So I started all these peer witnessed kind of supervised injection rooms in a bunch of Rain City projects. And those weren't particularly effective for a multiplicity of reasons at reducing overdose rates, mainly because if people are going to overdose and die, they're already using drugs. They don't want to use drugs socially, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And in 2018, I was offered this job at the CDC that probably paid double, well, maybe not double, but a third as much of the wage. Up until things get really hairy, I'm operating on purely mercenary type. I'm like, whoever's paying me the most, I'm working there.
Right. Yeah.
I was married to someone that wanted all this cosmetic surgery. I was like, I'll go get this job. I can pay for all your shit. When I saw what I saw there was, wow, this problem is happening all across, the province. Like, people are dying en masse all across the province. Not as acutely in the downtown east side per se, but it's happening everywhere. And even in places that already have services. I mean, the downtown east side being the prime example of this, we have, all these co-located services. Why does everyone continue to die? Like, people have access to overdose prevention sites in the lock zone, to some extent, this like medicalized, safer supply. What I come to realize is that it's actually market deregulation that's killing people. It's not accidental overdose. It's not, drug supply contamination. The drug supply just follows the rhythm of capitalism, right? It follows the free hand of the market, I think they say it. So however dealers can make the most money, they're going to do that, right? So it's not so much an intentional poisoning of the drug supply as someone realized, hey, fentanyl is a viable substitute for heroin and we can manufacture it domestically. Same with crystal meth. The reason you see crystal meth replace crack cocaine as a prime stimulant, it's all cost-based. On like a point of crystal meth, and I can say this from us, it's $1.75, right? A point of crack is like $5, $10, depending on who you are and how bad you are with money. So you have this drive. It's a drive towards fentanyl, and it's a drive towards crystal meth, ostensibly for purely economic reasons, because they're not imported drugs. You can manufacture them domestically for dirt cheap, and then you can sell them for tremendous profit margins. So what I realized when I'm working this high-paying job at the CDC, and I was hired as the provincial peer coordinator. My job was to bolster peer services across the province. What I realized is, well, if you want everyone to stop dying, you need to regulate the drug market. You need to sell people drugs with a predictable content, which is what they don't get from the illicit drug market, approximately for the most part. If you go on the street, and especially in Vancouver, if you go on the street and try and buy drugs here, there's absolutely no guarantee what you will get, no matter what you try and buy. Unless you test it. So ostensibly, I'm like, somebody's got to, open some kind of store where they sell drugs in a regulated way. And everyone at the CDC is like, you're crazy. And I'm like, and another thing, there's this kind of diffusion of harm reduction services throughout the province. So we may say that, every community of need has a safe injection site or has a drug users resource group, which I found to not be the case at all, especially not in the, more rural parts of the province, even, places like Prince George, which after I was liquidated from my job at the CDC, did end up getting these services. But you'd be like, people are getting wiped out here. You have this like bogus, white supremacist city council, and nobody's doing anything. So I kept saying this, and everyone was like, you're being abusive. You're saying we're the reason everyone's dying. You're talking to the government, accusing them of killing people, blah, blah, blah. You can't do this. You can't do that. And I was like, fuck you. Fire me. And, what ends up happening is eventually they do, fucking 5 months into my probation or whatever. My boss would call me into our office every Monday, be like, you do such good work, but you can't do it like this, and I get angrier and angrier, being like, well, no one wants to stop this problem, and it's a, provincially declared public health crisis since 2016, I believe, of which we're now on year 7, and eventually they fire me. But because they were basically like, you're a junkie bum, like, yes person, like, your job here is to be like, yes, nice resource you've created or whatever. I just sat there and I read the law, and I would phone lawyers. And what I realized working there was that someone needed to write what's called the Section 56 exemption to the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act. And Section 56 is I guess you would call it the steam valve to the hot water tank of the drug law, meaning it exists to permit the federal government to allow exemptions for scientific, medical purposes, or other purposes to the benefit of Canadian society. What I realized is someone had to use this exemption in order to run some kind of, market regulation project, right? So I write all this kind of foundational, outlining legal, I guess you would call it a review of legal processes, kind of explaining what needs to happen in order to stop this public health crisis. Well, the CDC fires me, and then I go on to run this conference called the Safe Supply Conference in 2018, and that's where I met Jeremy Calican. He was the only person. We would have a weekly organizing call. I was contracted by this group, New Leaf, the NIMO, to run this conference, and we would have a weekly organizing call. I hadn't met him yet, but he would be the only person other than myself on this call. And eventually we run this conference, and the conclusion of the conference is somebody's got to run the store that regulates the drug supply. And everyone's like, yeah, someone should do that. Well, what happens over the next year, I break up with my ex-spouse, and we start in Vancouver because there's no end in sight to all these deaths. We start handing out drugs for free, being like, someone should regulate the drug supply. And this kind of accumulates, I would say. This is kind of the origin of Dulf. So in 2019, I think we did our first giveaway where cocaine was handed out. And then in 2020, I could be a little chronologically confused. It could start in 2020, but it's neither here nor there. We eventually start amping up kind of the scale, and we're like, how far can we push this till we go to jail? Which includes like handing out heroin in front of the police station with the city councilor and sending the chief of police a huge Willy Wonka ticket, inviting him to this thing. And I guess in many ways over that kind of 2019 to present period, I kind of go off the deep end. Like my radicalism, my willingness to put myself in extreme jeopardy in order to achieve my ends grows out of a disenfranchisement with pretty much everything, period, right? I'm like, I might as well be dead, and if I'm not dead, I might as well be doing something for the benefit of everyone, myself included, obviously as someone that uses drugs. And I never want to make this seem like it's a project of empathy or compassion or something, even though it's called the Compassion Club, whatever, because I don't believe in any of those terms. I'm like, it's a sympathetic project between myself and other drug users. I don't want to go to prison. I don't think other people should be in prison. Their enemy is my enemy, and therefore we're fighting the same enemy. It's not, oh, I pity you, let me put myself into your shoes, I'm going to fix a problem. It's a very, hand-to-mouth kind of situation, because I think I said this the other day. I'm like, there are two things I like doing. One is drugs, and the other one's having anal sex, and both of them, up until quite recently, were illegal. And I'm not going to jail for doing either one, because I don't think anyone should. Well, so I have a very literal connection to solving a problem that's affecting a whole lot of people beyond me. Kind of to bring everything to a head from that. So in Vancouver, again, you have an escalated overdose rate. And not only that, you have an overdose rate that's 25 times the national average in the downtown east side. You have me just not giving a fuck, prepared to die. You have us already getting away with a lot. Like, if I have any advice for other groups who are dealing with the same kind of situation, it's start small or operate entirely clandestinely. I think you have a better chance of success in the public side, but only if the public's behind you. So I wouldn't say jump off the deep end and open a store. I would say start with these kind of, we're giving drugs away to show that they won't cause overdoses, with follow-up in the immediate community. Go from there to store, not unless you have your local health authorities support or whatever, So you get to 2021, and we've done several of these giveaways. We haven't had any overdoses. We've been doing kind of follow-up with the people that have been receiving the drugs. We're not hearing very many negative complaints. I know if you look at some of our initial distributions, there's quite a high cut of caffeine in the heroin, and then following that, there's quite a high cut of 6-monoacetyl morphine. Both of those things were byproducts of COVID, because you have to remember heroin's an imported drug. It's like the same with the cut of cocaine you would see. There was like a lot more levamisole and fucking vitamin B12, the stuff that people buff into cocaine back in the COVID era than there is currently. It's a lot easier to get pure cocaine now. We do all these giveaways and we're like, well, it doesn't seem like anyone else is going to run this store project, so I guess it's up to us to do it, because we have a way we could do it using the illicit market. We have the testing infrastructure that we've already used via Substance, which is the University of Victoria, and they do paper spray mass spectrum. These testing mechanisms are real tongue twisters. Paper spray mass spectrometry, as well as FTIR, which is fucking Fourier transmitter light refraction, whatever, which uses like a laser to like bounce. It uses light to detect what's in a sample. I don't want to get into too much. Jeremy's a chemist. I'm the artist of the operation, but we have access to testing that's good enough. We're like, look, Government of Canada, we can do this two ways. Either you give us the exemption and then we can approach pharmaceutical companies to do this, because they're not going to give us the time of day if we don't have an exemption. Because if we're trafficking drugs, even if we buy them from a pharmaceutical source, that's against the law. That's still drug trafficking. You can't traffic heroin without an exemption, right? Any project, look at Crosstown, they have a Section 56 exemption. So we're like, either you do that, or we go the illicit route where we don't work with a pharmaceutical corporation and we buy drugs from the dark web, because it's the most pragmatic, least dangerous, methodology we can acquire these substances from, unless we have access directly to a pharmaceutical corporation. So kind of over this time, a year goes by until July of 2022, and we don't hear. Health Canada asks us, July of 2022, yeah, correct. Health Canada only speaks to us once, maybe twice, but it's to ask clarifying questions. They're like, well, how would you be accountable? For instance, how would you inventory these substances and prevent people from stealing them? And then we were really, gave them a couple options. We were like, we could put them into these like bomb-proof Mark Tyndall machines, which would cost a tremendous amount of money, but if you gave us the funding, why not? Or we could, which is our model currently, use medication, administration records, MARS basically, which, we track everything anonymously. So we do keep track of who buys what and the inputs and outputs and transfers and purchase, that's all on paper. We do not track by name. There's nothing attached to anyone's medical record as you would conventionally see with a MAR. And through this kind of time period, we start what's called the Dope on Arrival program. And this is something I don't think people understand about Dulf, is that we have two, core streams of programming. One is each time the coroner releases their number of people that have died, releases the number of fatalities from the unregulated drug supply. Each time that happens, we will give out free drugs to a local drug user group, and in certain cases, provincial drug user groups, although that hasn't, necessarily worked out the best. There's been cases of individuals just saying, oh yeah, I'm going to hand out the drugs, and then they take all the drugs, and we don't, yeah, not ideal behavior, but regardless. So we were doing this thing, and we continue to do it, where when the coroner releases a number of deaths, we provide 3.5 grams of each cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine for free to a given group using crowdsourced funds. They distribute that to their membership. We check in, and we no deaths, no adverse effects, And then we have what's called the Evaluative Compassion Club. So the framework we sent to Health Canada, which is available on our website, www.dulf.ca, which is about, 200 some odd pages or whatever. This framework, they reject our application to be able to run the project. We also submit what's called a SUAP, a Substance Use and Addictions Program grant, which is a request to, I want to say Health Canada, it could be the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions now, but we submitted a kind of corresponding grant application, asking for money to fund the evaluation. Our SUOP, the Substance Use and Addictions Program grant, gets rejected in April, I believe, of 2022. And again, all this information, sorry, March 29th, 2022. This is also on our website. All our documentation is public facing. Anyone can steal it. Like if anyone wanted to run a project, we're really not of the school of thought where we think it's, ethical to hide what we're doing. Minus our location, minus things that would obviously put us in danger. We don't want to share that information with the general public. But all our program frameworks, the way we operate, the way we do everything is all available through our website. So we get our grants, our funding proposal is rejected in March of 2022. And then in July, we get an email that basically is like, you guys say you're going to use the illicit market, that funds organized crime. Also, there's all these UN conventions about trafficking illicit narcotics. You have to listen to the UN, like Canada does that, haha. So we're basically like, we don't have another option to use the illicit market unless you grant us this exemption. Like you're putting the cart ahead of the horse. Instead of working with us, you're working against us. And we say, look, if you're not going to give us the exemption, we're going to run the project anyway, like kick rocks, Mm-hmm. What ends up happening is the day after we say that, they reject our application. But simultaneously to this occurring, our local health authority, Vancouver Coastal Health, under the declaration of a public health emergency, which invokes the Public Health Act, I think it's called, grants Dulf an exemption to run drug testing overdose prevention services. So before Health Canada rejects our application, our local health authority gives us this, wishy-washy exemption to operate, which later is codified by a different exemption that I'm still not sure I'm allowed to speak too much to, but we are operating in a very silly kind of gray zone. On top of this fact, Jeremy Callicum, who's the other Dulf co-founder, is applying to med school. His reference to med school is a person that rejected our application. Dig that. So anyway, we run the project for a year. It's a randomized control study initially, right? So we have 21 people. We go to Vandu, we go to all the drug user groups in the neighborhood in July. And we're like, look, we're running this study. If you want, you can, if you're someone who's over the age of 19, if you use cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamine, if you're at risk of overdose, if you're a member of a drug user group in Vancouver's downtown east side, you can apply to, be picked for this study, right? And so we get this list of 200 applicants, right? So we go to Vandu, and in classic Vandu style, we draw names out of a hat. I know we could have used a computer or whatever, but it didn't seem as appropriate given, the nature of Vandu and its history. So we draw 21 people out of the hat. That is the treatment group, or what's called the treatment group. Basically the group that has access to the club. And then we draw another 21 people, and that's the control group. So that's a group who we study, but we don't allow access to the club. And so 3 months goes by. So we open the store in August, probably August 10th, I think. And then 3 months go by, which puts you in November. And at this point in time, we're like, Jesus Christ, this is so unethical. We can't have a control group. We can't just study people and not give them access to the club. It feels too fucked up. So we give the club, we give the control group access to the club. So now we have a 42-person treatment group and no control. So the study kind of goes from being a randomized control study to just a randomized study where we take people, from this population, drug users in the downtown east side, who there's a million other studies that we can use as a control, whether it's VITUS, Vancouver Injection Drug User Survey, whether it's insights data, whether it's other OPS data, whatever, that we can use to compare our study with. And then subsequently, there are a few people that we have to prioritize adding to the club for various reasons. So we end up with around, I think we're up to 52 people can access it right now. And, we frequently think about adding more people, but you have to think we've been running this project illegally for a year. And right now you don't have the pro version of Zoom.
I don't. But will I be able to call you back if it runs out? It's going to run out. I'll have to do a second.
It will run out. Feel free to call me back.
Okay, fuck.
It'll also do that thing where it makes you wait for the recording to load, but I don't have anything else to do till 7, so I got time.
That's my blessing then. That it's intermission. We'll call it intermission in 9 minutes.
Yeah, I'll go get a glass of water because I've been talking so much. Anyway, so basically, a year into running the project, our findings are kind of the following, right? And this, again, is also, if you go on Dulf.ca right now, this is a landing page. It's a bunch of demographic information, but basically, over the last year for the Evaluative Compassion Club, we've provided 3 kilos of drugs, right? Because we use what's called economy of scale, where we buy in a large amount and then we don't charge profit selling it at a small amount, because when you buy in bulk, you reduce your cost. So, an ounce is going to be cheaper than 7 grams. 5 ounces is going to be cheaper than 1 ounce, blah, blah, blah. What we've calculated by comparing the price of drugs on the street to our price of drugs is that we've prevented approximately $100,000. We've sold like $130,000 of drugs. We've prevented $100,000 of profit from going into hands of organized crime.
And what does the UN? I want to know what the UN has to say about that.
UN, they're all over the place in drug policy, and there's like ongoing subcommittees of the UN that are trying to revise their drug policy. But I think the important thing the reason I bring this up is because the preamble to the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act says the purpose of this act is to guarantee the health of the Canadian public and the public safety, right? So ostensibly to prevent people from becoming addicted to drugs, however you want to understand that, and to prevent organized crime from flourishing, So I'm like, up until recently, we didn't have a very good argument at how we're, preventing organized crime from thriving, because the argument would be, well, you got to just buy drugs from criminal gangs. But at the end of the day, what actually we're doing is reducing the inflows of capital, because we don't have that kind of aggressive, exploitative price gouging that, that organized crime has. And I would never fault people for trying to make money. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to badmouth criminals, because I've done a lot of criminal stuff in my life, even now. But I will say, like, if you want to make the argument that we're supporting organized crime, my response would be, well, you can't not support organized crime if you're going to touch illegal narcotics. We're at least reducing the harm of, caused by the drug market, harm reduction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to move on from that point, which I just want to make out the gate, because everyone's going to be like, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, we're a far better model than what you have now. But to move into the health and social outcomes. So the first thing to note is 0 people have died from taking our drugs ever, from either stream, from the free drug dope on arrival program or from the Evaluative Compassion Club. And I guess for context, because I didn't bring this up, people can come 4 days a week right now. We're open 24 hours per week, not 24 hours per day, but like 2 4-hour shifts and 2 8-hour shifts approximately. And they can buy up to 14 grams of each drug per week. So 14 grams of coke, 14 grams of meth, 14 grams of heroin at a time, meaning someone could buy 14 grams of heroin, walk out the front door with it, Bob's your uncle, right? We've had 0 deaths. We've had 0 overdoses with naloxone administered. And then statistically, because we do this gigantic evaluation, there's been a 32% decrease in overdoses requiring naloxone for the entire study population, a 35% reduction in all overdoses, and for the subpopulation of people who have ever injected drugs, which to me, it doesn't mean you're actively injecting drugs, but it means you have, at least at one point in time, there's a 68% reduction in overdoses with naloxone required and a 57% reduction in all overdoses. And I think that's important because these people are going to be, classically the population that's more at risk of overdose. Like there are people that have access to our program because, again, it was randomized within the confines of being a member of a drug user group, who have never overdosed, who have never injected drugs, who are just like, I smoke crystal meth, or I'm a party cocaine user, So for those people, you can't have a reduction in overdoses because you start at zero. So when you move into the more hardcore crowd of people that are using drugs, there are, greater reductions. And then we move into these observed. So people will come back to us and be like, well, that's self-reported data, right? Like you're asking people to report to you how many times they overdosed in the last 3 months and then comparing these blocks of time and running averages and blah, 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 doing all the boring, annoying stuff you do when you do population and public health science. So we also run a supervised OPS, meaning we watch people use drugs and we see what they're using, right? So we've had to date around 800 uses of our OPS. Again, because we don't force people to do their doses there. We don't have a rule where it's like we have to witness you. So the majority of people buy their drugs and they leave.
Is this the overnight site? Or
no,
separate OPS?
This is a separate OPS. So we have a brick and mortar store that sells the drugs, right? That people come into who are members of the Compassion Club. And that store has an OPS. So the OPS is only open during the hours where we sell drugs.
Right.
And I again try to draw the parallel to like a cannabis dispensary, or even a liquor store. You don't conventionally buy your liquor and drink it there, or buy your cannabis and smoke it in the dispensary, right? You leave with it. So the fact that we're not like an OPS specifically, like we wouldn't force people to do drugs in front of us because we think that's unethical. But from what we have observed, which include 219 uses of our heroin, 188 of which were without concurrent use of street drugs, 278 uses of our cocaine, 143 of those uses that were without concurrent use of street drugs, and 414 uses of methamphetamine, 268 of which were without concurrent use of street drugs. There have been 0 overdoses. If you look at the 2017 insight rate of overdose, and this is like the very early end of the crisis, they had a 9.5 overdose per 1,000 witness uses, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a 0 for 800. Probably at this point, we've never had an overdose at the site, and I guarantee you, like the longer the amount of uses grows exponentially, so the longer we run the project, the more people use the OPS, but we've never had an overdose. So if you compare our project to an OPS where they don't sell drugs, we have an astronomically lower rate of overdose. So I think these kind of findings are really important. And the last thing I'll say before the time cuts us off, because we only have a minute. So we also looked at people's rates of engagement with the cops. We looked at whether or not they've been hospitalized and whether or not they've experienced drug-related violence, meaning you owe a dealer money and they kick your ass because you owe them money, right? There's a 48% decrease in police engagement in our study. There's a 50% decrease in hospitalizations and a 39% decrease in drug-related violence. So these are all pretty astronomical findings. And I'll leave it there and we'll come back and discuss a little further after.
Today's episode of Spinnin Yarns is brought to you by Juice. People are thirsty. Give them some juice, you fucking asshole.
Okay, so it sounds like you handed the government the golden ticket and they just turned their back.
Well, here's my read on it. We didn't have this data when we initially, no one has done this. No one's run a demedicalized project where they can just buy drugs, so there's the closest piece of evidence we have is Crosstown, things like Naomi and Salome and these kind of like, heroin opiate agonist, injectable heroin opiate agonist trials.
Right.
That has nothing to do with our model. Quite frankly, I don't think, to me, the medicalization of drug use is the most ridiculous thing ever. Like, drugs are not a carceral issue, meaning they shouldn't be dealt with by the police, and they're certainly not a medical issue for the most part. Most people do drugs and it doesn't cause them extreme medical duress beyond being hungover, and maybe you'll get, bladder cancer at age 60 because you're an alcoholic or whatever. But people aren't destroying their lives because they have 12 drinks after work. They go to work and then they come home and they drink whatever, So the medicalization of drugs, this idea that, oh, you have to have a disorder and go to a doctor and it has to be treatment for a disease, the diseased model of addiction, all this to me is ridiculous. And, I'm very anti-psychiatric. And I think it should just be thrown in the trash. So when we go to Health Canada initially, they have nothing to, it's all conjecture to it, right? We're going and we're like, hey, we have a model that based on all these other pieces of evidence, none of which are literally what we're asking to do, we believe will very, very positively impact people's health, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so well, to the government, it's political suicide. Because the way this reads in the media, first of all, I'm like, we seem like crackpots. I mean, this is why we get Jeremy to do a lot of the comms and not me, because look at him, look at me. But I'm like, we're not like, neither of us is like an MD or something. So it's kind of two people with like both lived experience of drug use and backgrounds in the field, although not the correct professional credentials, proposing a model with support, admittedly, from various academics and academic institutions. That would, the liberals would just get torched approving. Like that, it would be like the conservatives would be like, you guys legalized heroin, which is far from what we even requested, but I could see how it would come across as political suicide. So I think the unfortunate reality is this is going to need to, when our application was rejected all that time ago in July of 2022, more than a year and 2 months ago, we took Health Canada to court saying that they had ignored people's fundamental charter rights, specifically their Section 7 charter right, which is their right to life, liberty, security of person, blah, blah, blah. And their Section 15 charter right, which is the right to not be discriminated against because they have a mental disorder. Now, the thing is, and as much as I disagree with, diagnoses of substance use disorder, if you have a substance use disorder, which is a thing in the DSM, a mental health disorder in the DSM, I should say, if you have a substance use disorder, which means you have to recursively go out and buy drugs, no matter how much trouble you get in, no matter what legal paradigm exists, blah, 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 and you do not have access to safe drugs, your, Section 7 charter rights and your Section 15 charter rights, the right to not be discriminated against if you have a mental disorder, are being infringed upon by the Canadian state. And that's kind of our argument in court, that by not allowing us to run this project, you're neglecting people's fundamental Section 7 and 15 charter rights, right?
But you guys, you're doing all the work, but it's just about, it's like a race.
Well, the problem is scale, and the problem is the scope of the obliterate. Like I have very severe PTSD if I wake up screaming in cold sweats like 5 out of 7 nights of the week. You know, and I feel like I'm one step away from a mental breakdown. So I'm like, what we have is evidence that shows the project works, to some extent. And we have, we can argue about scientific significance till the cows come home. We're working on writing a very academic paper. We have significance depending on which test you run, and because we don't have in stats. I don't know how much you know about population stats, and I'm probably going to bore your pants off, but normally you want what's called a normative distribution, meaning it looks like a bell curve, right? You have a population with a median, and things go out, over whatever, 3 quartiles, and then you have 3 standard deviations away, and you can run like one-tailed or two-tailed parametric test to find significance, to find a p-value. We don't, our sample size is much too small. We have whatever, 52 people. Well, so we don't have a normatively distributed sample, meaning we can't run normative, parametric. We have to run non-parametric tests. And then you get into all these like philosophy of science, philosophy of statistics questions about, where at what point do you hit statistical significance with a non-normatively distributed. Like all this shit is coming up where I'm like, I didn't even think we'd get this far, let alone have to deal with this as a problem.
Yeah.
And assuming we're right, assuming it is our intervention that's causing all of these outcomes to improve, and it's not just random chance. Like this program should be scaled up exponentially. And then there are questions about, well, where are you getting the drugs to run that exponentially scaled up question? And instead of, remember back at the beginning of this when I was like, I had this fucking idea in 2018 when I worked for the government, and then they fired me because they said I was too much of a bitch. Well, if we had started working on this then, let alone, after the success of Naomi Salome in the fucking early 90s, blah, 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 like we could have avoided this. How many people are going to die? Well, we have to figure this out and put all the pieces together. Where are we going to get all the drugs from? And then questions about, the anti-colonial struggle, cooperations with the global South, and building out, fair trade networks of heroin and opium and blah, blah, blah. Like we've been destroying the world with colonial violence. Look at Afghanistan or South and Central America for the last infinitesimal amount of time, and all of a sudden the Global Good Earth, Good Government League is going to pull a 180 on their like, let's kill everyone shit. They got Epstein Island. They got a lot. Yeah. They got a lot on the line. They got like rape and tortured children island that, we're fucking with. So really, from my perspective, I didn't think we'd ever push it this far, let alone run the project for a year, let alone get like what we believe is scientifically significant data, let alone, blah, 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 blah. Like I thought the train would just run off the tracks and we'd all go to jail.
Yeah.
Well, now everything's super fucked up, and I'm like, what are we gonna do? And everyone's like, la la la. You know what I mean? And it's I don't know what the answer. I mean, I could rattle off some like theoretical directions this could go, but without like more, at least national cooperation, and if not international cooperation, we're gonna be in deep shit real fast.
And what if there was just more groups that joined, like on the federal level, like on your same level, and not on the government side?
I just don't know where do we run out of heroin though? You know what I mean? Like I'm like, there's all this speculation, like, oh, the Taliban don't want to manufacture heroin anymore because it's, it goes against their beliefs and blah blah blah. So they're going to throttle the supply. During COVID, it was pretty fucking difficult to get pure heroin, just period. And I'm like, where does the supply come from? Like, I do think with our model, you can push it so far. And you could push it really, really far if groups could sell fentanyl. I think selling, and that's the other thing, is we only have, a third rate of titration onto heroin if people are addicted to fentanyl. So 2 out of 3 people that are daily fentanyl users cannot switch to heroin even with access to it. Right. Like it's not strong enough. Yeah. Well, so someone's got to start selling and manufacturing fentanyl. But the political conversation is, think of the kids. It's like Reverend Lovejoy's wife, and I'm like, how are we going to go from you have two dumb morons in Vancouver who are like, we think we have the answer to like a lot of international strife and the new Jim Crow and flood and all this money and power trying to crush people down. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I do think it starts like any other political movement with other people going out and doing it, but I do see very large logistical problems emerging quite quickly. And even with us, it's like we're trafficking so much drugs. Like how much risk do we want to put ourselves at? Like, do we want to get killed on some shit and then not be able to do anything? You know what I mean?
Do you think they're just like waiting for you to run the train off the tracks, or like, are they going to shut you down?
I think what they're waiting for is us to go to court, and our court date is March the 7th.
Okay.
If we lose in court, I don't know what'll happen. Quite frankly, I'm just like, what the fuck? What do people expect to happen? Like, unless they do what we're advocating for, everyone dies, right?
Yeah.
I've never seen an intervention, overdose prevention sites, which are actually overdose reversal sites. Like, they don't prevent overdoses, they reverse them.
Mhm.
Well, you can only push that so far because the majority of people that use drugs don't want to go to some fucking, medicalized environment or even a peer-run, injection site to use it. There's like most people have routines of drug use where they either use drugs alone or with their friends.
Mhm.
Well, if you're alone and no one's got Narcan, you're dead if you OD, right?
Yeah.
Well, so I'm like, you can't go in the direction of overdose prevention sites. You can't go in the direction of medicalization because ain't nobody want to see their fucking doctor to be prescribed Dilaudid for their fentanyl addiction, so they have to shoot 92 Dilaudid pills. I'm like, there's a reason it's all getting diverted. I told them when they rolled out that program, I was like, nobody's gonna want this. It's weak as fuck. Your evidence, which you're pulling from your ass on this, like there's no evidence that this could work on this scale. Sorry, I forgot. I did tell someone I would meet them and just hand them something, so I might have to run away for a second. But there's all these big questions like scale. I'm like, anybody can run a small version of what we're doing and keep their friends safe. I guarantee you, if you buy drugs from the dark web, they're going to be safer than things you find on the street because the dark web at least has peer-reviewed, it's like Amazon. You're like, this seller has 5 stars and I can find out if they're good or bad, even barring drug testing. And then realistically, I don't know. I don't know if every sorry, I got to deal with this. I'll run down.
No problem.
I don't know. Not every province has the type of drug test, but at least within BC, I know anybody can courier drugs to substance and get at least PSMS level testing. And we do, at this point, we have an agreement with the University of British Columbia to do nuclear magnetic resonancy testing, which is far more exact in telling us what's in samples. But for the vast majority of this project, we didn't have that agreement. And honestly, I'm like, knowing that something is like 98% and not 100% is not gonna, no one's gonna fucking notice, you know what I mean? Because the other 2% is like molecules that neither type of test can pick up, which again goes back to manufacturer. But I just have to run this package downstairs.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Hey,
So
so I'm thinking we need to see more drug user groups across the country pop up and take on the responsibility to order the drugs from the dark web, because it's just not practical that people are going to order their dope on online. Like, there needs to.
So there's different levels of solution, right? I think a very foundational thing, and we just know this generally, is if you create spaces for people to use drugs to go, this improves their health and social outcomes right off the bat. So if you have a high needs community, i.e. one where the overdose rate is higher than it statistically should be, you should probably have some kind of drug user union or network, or like a VANDU, right?
Yeah.
And then if you have that, you can stack a compassion club on top of it. But you start hitting just questions of scale and scope and amount of work and amount of energy. Like, you need mass industrial reform to end this crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You need like the end of segregation level of reform in the national and international politics. And right now, what you have is people being like, nah, so my real question is, I'm like, you can get access to this toolkit, and we're more than happy to provide it to people and coach them on how to use it. But you will very quickly realize that what we're doing is fucking psychotic.
Mm-hmm.
And, most people are not going to have the individual capacity or just like it would be very hard for me to imagine anyone else running this project because of how much effort it takes. And even without the evaluation, like right now I'm working like 100 hours a week, and I can only do that because I take Dexedrine constantly and then take Xanax to go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm like, that's not, my body feels like it's imploding. I feel like I'm going to die. My brain's all fucked up. I'm like, this has destroyed my life and my well-being, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But I'm sure if you're in a high enough needs community, you'll be in the same situation. But even barring the mental aspect of running the project, then you have to think about organized crime. Like, it's not the police that scare me, because the police coming in and trying to arrest us. Like, we have human rights lawyers and criminal defense lawyers. It would be a PR nightmare. It's organized crime. That I'm right here. You know what I mean? It's not like anyone's protecting me. I'm walking down the street in the downtown east side. You can come and find me and kill me pretty easily. Let alone kidnap me and do horrible fucking stuff. Well, I'm like, who's going to take on all this risk? You know what I mean? And it's certainly not going to be conventional drug dealers, hand to mouth kind of like survival drug dealers, don't have the capacity to do the amount of like, for us to guarantee our Compassion Club members a tested regulated supply of drugs, we have to have 4 ounces of each substance on hand at all times, and that's for 50 people. And for every 10 people we add, you need another $10,000 of drugs on inventory. Because not only do you have to have drugs that have been tested, you have to have drugs that are awaiting testing, you have to have drugs in the process of being delivered. Like, it's this huge industrial process we're doing. And so I don't want to claim it's impossible for anyone else to do, but I'm like, there's a reason we haven't seen anyone take up our, like, you know what I mean? We've been running it for a year, and there's still no one else doing it. Unless there's someone doing it clandestinely, and God bless you for that work. But as far as I know, there's not another version of this project. And that's kind of my concern, is that we are death by pilot study. We kind of get like into the position where they're like, well, yeah, you can run your little project for 50 people, but we're not letting you expand it. And you're just like stuck like this indefinitely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so where do you push the envelope? And it's not like we can shut down. If we shut the program down, everyone that relied on us for safe drugs would go back to the illicit drug market and die,
Yeah.
Well, so we're fucked. Like, the situation's fucked, and they're not. I'm not very optimistic about outcomes. I'm optimistic about our results being demonstrative that there is something else that could happen, but how you get from A to Z, is not clear to me. And I'm sure it's even more unclear to people who have power, right?
Yeah. And if they're not going to participate, it's like that's it. It's you're there like a fucking ant farm. They're just watching, like it's a fishbowl. It's crazy. Well, so what's going on with the overnight OPS? That's some more some more friends with some more
That's actually
civil
one that
disobedience.
coalition appears. So that's an organization I founded, but I left that group to fund this. I
Okay.
mean, the lay of the land in Vancouver, and especially in the downtown east side, is just there are people doing drugs all over the place, people overdosing. I live right next to a fire hall, so I can hear the sirens constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Like people are fucked up all over the place. Well, up until Coalition started that OPS, there was no overdose prevention services overnight, right? So you would have this gap from about 2 a.m. till 11 a.m. where if someone wanted to use drugs, they couldn't use them at a supervised site because the Insight would shut down and OPS, Overdose Prevention Society, would shut down, the Molson off, blah, blah. Hey, all these sites, Sister Space, whatever. Maybe Sister Space might have been open, but it is a women's only space. So it's not accessible to everyone, for a multiplicity of different reasons. And the Coalition took it upon themselves to kind of bridge the gap overnight without funding, which is another totally psychotic. Like that's a project even I wouldn't want to run, and God bless the people that are doing it. Like that's like truly heroic because I'm like, well, you're gonna get the craziest fucking people. Who's up in the middle of the night shooting dope is like crazy people,
Yeah.
Well,
sure.
so I'm like sort of running the site, and I'm like, it's going well. I know they're trying to raise money to pay their volunteers and shit, and there's I don't know what the link or
Defund 604 Network has a fundraiser run, and we'll link it up in the show notes.
Yeah, so they're trying to do that. So you have there's this sentence: "Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe." Right. So I think there are all these interventions that are being executed by the community for the community.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not getting supported in the way they should. And society just pushes. Society's lazy. It's weak. It's herd-like. It pushes towards carceral solutions to everything. I think to have a society without police or without police-style interventions, you have to have a very self-disciplined society, and you have to have people who are ready to be brave and courageous in situations that warrant it, where you could just shoot someone with a gun, but instead you're going to intervene in their mental health crisis. And that takes a tremendous amount of personal fortitude, even just responding to overdoses. You know what I mean? That shit fucks you up. It'll rot your brain and make you insane if you do it too much.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm like, you have, and this is kind of partially because I've always been a piece of shit or whatever, and these are my people, I guess. But you have the underbelly of society that has to maintain some kind of stasis, and I guess at the end of the day, even I'm turning into just this jaded person that's like, nobody gives a fuck, like everyone dies.
Yeah.
That's and I don't
Wow.
I don't know. Can you have social reform in short periods of time? We've seen it happen before, but it doesn't happen without, you have to have the carrot and the stick. And right now there's neither. Dulf is kind of both, and not doing any either exceptionally well. I guess, to a limited extent, we're producing this data that's never existed before. So when people come and are like, you don't know, selling drug users drugs with a predictable content will prevent their overdoses, you can be like, well, yeah, we do know because there's this rigorous scientific study, right? That didn't exist before. But
where they left us alone in the downtown east side of Vancouver for 20 years to run this research. It's insane.
Well,
and go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking of what we can do to help you, like your heroin mart, right? Where you've got merch.
Yeah. Well, you can support us and stuff, but I'm as a person running this shit, I try and think about the big picture, and I look at what needs to happen is like international reform.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's not just the government. I'm like, you have a whole world that is just like against every type of drug except alcohol, and in some cases even alcohol, where the more prohibitionist your model is, the more the thing is pushed into some kind of illicit sphere where it becomes inordinately more dangerous. It's just like sex work or anything else. And what you need to do is take things out of the illicit sphere and move them into the sphere of regulation if you want to reduce the harm of the thing. The problem is when you start moving something out of an illicit sphere and into the sphere of regulation, it starts impacting your body politic. Like it'll start becoming apparent to the majority of society that there is a problem rather than just a specialized group of researchers or whomever, right? And once you start talking to the general populace about very complicated issues, this kind of drive to herd, drive to Nazism, people's secret fascist and totalitarian, they're just like kill them and put them in jail, right? Well, I'm like, uh-oh, and I'm like, maybe the answer is just have Brave New World, where it's like, shut up, I'm in where you do get authoritarianism, but it's like, at least there's no more suffering kind of authoritarianism, and I would certainly take that over what we have now, although I'd probably be banished to Iceland. But I'm like, what we have now in this community is slaughter of the worst kind. And I haven't even talked about the colonial dimensions of this, but you have to understand that, first of all, BC is predominantly unceded, indigenous territory, with Vancouver sitting on the homelands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. There is a disproportionate amount of indigenous people who are overdosing and dying, and other indigenous people are like, look, the downtown east side's like it's just like any other reserve. So if you have this community that's predominantly indigenous, where people are getting fucking smoked out of the water, dead from overdoses, and they're all indigenous people, I'm like, isn't that a machination of genocide? Well, you would imagine people would want to live in a society where we don't celebrate genocide, but then you look at other shit and you're like, wait, people don't have clean drinking water. Mm-hmm. Like people in our country don't have clean water. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And shit, you're just like, the fuck, where's everyone's humanity and humility and stuff? And I think at the end of the day, this is why I'm more like a Republican than anything else, because I'm like, society must be defended. Like people should, I don't care where the upper echelon is, as long as the lowest of the low have a bare minimum subsistence. You know what I mean? And certainly water, shelter, food, drugs, love, education, these kind of things are paramount to having that. And socially, people just want to sit at home and jerk off and watch Game of Thrones. I'm like, yeah. Well, I'm like, we're fucked, and I guess as radical actors, all you can do is try and push the envelope and do things that are conducive to social change. But like,
for as long as you can stand it without going insane.
I'm certainly not an optimist. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you can't help anyone unless you can help yourself, right? So. Well, I think Charles Manson has that line: first you bring order to yourself, and then you bring order to your family, and then you can bring order to the world.
Charles Manson?
Yeah.
Well, for my money, you're national treasure, international treasure. I thank you for coming and joining me. My favorite interview so far, and I didn't have to say a word. I love it. I love to hear you. I love to hear you go.
Run my mouth. I will say, I don't mean to sound so pessimistic that there's no hope. I do think if you are so inclined, reach out to the Dulf email, which is just druguserliberationfront@gmail.com. And I can send you, I made this video tutorial. Filter Magazine was supposed to publish it, and then they wussed out like a bunch of wusses. But it's basically A to B, how to access drugs on the dark web. And if you can figure that out, I'm like, here are my recommendations to do what Dulf does. One, you need two nonprofits. You need the nonprofit that is responsible for selling the drugs, and then you need another nonprofit that can open bank accounts. Because the one that sells the drugs, and nobody's gonna they're gonna look at who you are and what you do and be like, this is fucked. We're not letting you open a bank at TD Bank, The second nonprofit, its purpose should be to convert money into cryptocurrency so you can access dark web markets. And that's it. It should be, we are started to allow nonprofits in our community to integrate cryptocurrencies into their operations. Then that thing, which acts as a brokerage, has a bank account, blah, blah, blah. The drug selling nonprofit buys cryptocurrency with cash. The cryptocurrency nonprofit buys the cryptocurrency with credit. And that allows you to have this circle of washing, if you will, of funds. And then the drug nonprofit sells the drugs at cost. Never make a profit off drugs if you're doing this. That's scumfuck behavior. Write grants or do it for free. For a long time, Dulf operated with no money or with crowdsourced money to buy the drugs. And then, I don't know. I feel like most of the provinces have some kind of mail-in drug checking service that uses at least paper spray mass spec. And I'm like, if you can access that, you're kind of operating from the point Dulf was. But it's a tremendous amount of work, and nobody's going to tell you you're doing a good job. Like, you're basically setting yourself up to wreck your life. But I think there are other people out there who probably have gotten to that point with seeing people die.
Yeah.
So I will say it's not for everyone, but it is viable to do on some kind of scale. I wonder where where this ends. Right.
I want to see the video. I want to see them.
I'll send it to you after this call. But I would say it's got to end somewhere. I hope it's somewhere positive. And I do want to leave this on a good note. In my ideal world, the war on drugs ends, and all these countries that we've ravaged with, whether it's proxy war or just overthrowing their governments or whatever kind of CIA meddling, we go back to them and we say, hey, do you want us to help you build your economies? We're going to buy, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine is obviously manufactured in Canada, but whatever, MDMA, which comes from the sassafras tree, hence my middle name. We're going to buy these drugs from you at reasonable prices, and everyone benefits, because up until now, this ultra-violent kind of, hyper-militarized gangs have controlled this system, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that shit could do a lot of good for the world, but it's too bad the world's controlled by, sadists who we should kill. And that's
the positive note to leave it on right there.
Well, I think change is possible. Just can something like Dolph be the tip of a spear that goes through,
I think it can.
Billionaires' heads. Well, let's keep fighting a good fight,
Yeah, always, please. And just are we gonna hear some more Dust Blaster? Is that in the cards? Or?
We broke up. Our drummer got way too pregnant, so we broke up and went on to start a new band. But I am working on several different music projects. My personal website is erisnyx.info.
Okay.
Which I'll put into the chat. And then you can also, my label's Bandcamp will also throw in here, which I just registered as a corporation. So I got some things on the horizon. I don't stop. I'm too crazy to slow down,
Yeah, I love it. Big fan.
All right, man. Well, I'll let you go, and thanks so much for the interview. Hey, it was good to be able to vent. I feel like I haven't been able to get that all off my chest in a minute.
You want to just scream for a little bit for 2 minutes?
I can't do that in my house. That would be mean to my neighbors. But,
I'd wake my kids up anyway.
No doubt.
Thank you. Thank you. Peace. Eris is wild. Genius radical. You can hear them talk. They're so frustrated and passionate about it, and it's a lot to take in. Talking about market deregulation, cost-based replacement of crack cocaine by domestically produced crystal meth, predictable content of drugs that are needed, diffusion of harm reduction services in a white supremacist government during a public health crisis and an OD epidemic, Section 56 Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, nuclear magnetic resonance testing. It's a lot. We're talking about all that. Eris knows their shit. Dulf knows their shit. Vancouver knows their shit. The drug user groups know their shit. They're the experts on this. You have to listen to them because not only do they know all of this shit, they know what it is for their friends to die all around them en masse for years. For years, man. This is turning into a generational trauma. Dude, you know, so we have to take all this on. And the whole time it is a bullshit white supremacist government on stolen land who doesn't give a fuck about clean water for indigenous people. They don't give a fuck about anything but themselves. Flying around in little airplanes. I don't know. Pretending they give a shit. They don't care. Who's gonna keep us safe? We're gonna keep us safe. Keep up the fight. I'll see you next time on Spinnin' Yarns.
Spinnin' Yarns is brought to you by Hi-Fi Umbilical Productions. We're 100% DIY with zero tolerance for intolerance. Spinnin' Yarns is recorded on stolen land in front of a live studio audience. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Gmail, and Linktree at Yarn Spinnin'. Please like, follow, and share to show your support. We're building this together. Spinnin' Yarns is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else you kids go for podcasts these days. Check out our Patreon if you'd like to help out the show, and you can always find us on the web at our landing site, joeamero.com.
If you'd like to be a guest on the show, reach out. Let's shoot the shit. We're just spinning yarns, connecting with respect and respecting the connections. Peace be with you, and let the peace be known.